What's up, guys? It's Marty with Exiled Power back at you for more rogue stuff for the newest patch. This time, I'm bringing you the PvE Subtlety Guide for the Tomb of Sargeras. In order to do that, I'm going to go over talents, stat priority, legendaries, rotation, and a few small tips that I think will go a long way to give your damage that much more of an edge. At its core, the Subtlety Rogue is still a rogue. It's still a combo point based spec. It still uses weaker abilities that cost energy to build up combo points, and then you spend those combo points on your hard hitting abilities. Unlike Assassination, Subtlety is not a dot based class. It has a dot to manage and it's important, but that's not where the majority of its damage comes from. The majority of its damage comes from an ability called Eviscerate. And the main focus of Subtlety is to set things up to make your Eviscerates hit as hard as possible. The main way you do that is with an ability called Shadow Dance. It's kind of a short-term cooldown, and it makes you go into kind of a shadowy state for a few seconds. And when you're in that shadowy state, you do significantly more damage. So you're kind of prepping for these Shadow Dance windows, and then inside the Shadow Dance windows, you're doing everything you can to make your Eviscerates hit like Mack trucks. There are two main builds for Subtlety, just like there were for Assassination. There is the build that makes you go into Shadow Dance more frequently, and there's the build that makes it so you go into Shadow Dance less frequently, but when you're in the Shadow Dance, it does a lot more damage. So it's kind of hard hitting moments fewer between, or less hard hitting moments, but more frequently. And the talents that you choose kind of dictate your play style for which of those you're going to go with. Right now, the prevalent spec is the one that has you going into Shadow Dance less frequently, but hits harder. Just like in the Assassination Guide, as I move forward, I'm going to explain this guide from the perspective of the most prevalent build, which is the hard-hitting Shadow Dance builds. To move into the meat of the guide, I want to start off by talking about talents, and specifically the talents that I think you should take to maximize your playstyle in this harder hitting Shadow Dance playstyle. I'm going to call this playstyle and build the Dark Shadow build after the talent that it primarily revolves around. So I'm going to go tier by tier. I'm going to focus mainly on the talents you should take, and not necessarily the ones you shouldn't, although I will briefly talk about possibly why they are not as strong. In tier 15, you're pretty much always going to default to taking Master of Subtlety. Master of Subtlety makes it so attacks made while stealth and for 5 seconds after breaking stealth cause you to do an additional 10% damage. So while you are coming out of your opener, coming out of Vanish, or in Shadow Dance, you're going to do 10% more damage. This feeds into the idea of the build. While you're Shadow Dancing, we want to hit harder. In tier 30, you're going to find a very similar story. Knight's Doctor makes it so while Stealth or Shadow Dance is active, you move 20% faster and your abilities do an additional 12% damage. So now we're taking our Shadow Dances from 10% additional to 22% additional, and we're just working that Shadow Dance up more and more and more. To understand our choice for tier 45, you have to understand the Subtlety Mastery. The Subtlety Mastery makes it so your finishing moves deal increased damage. And so that works with really well with the Deeper Stratagem talent in tier 45, which gives you an additional combo point and makes it so your finishing moves deal 5% increased damage. And so our mastery is already inflating the damage that our finishing moves do. 5% damage on top of that is going to make the eviscerates hit harder and harder and harder. So Deeper Stratagem works really well for sub in particular because the idea of sub, really hard hitting eviscerates, is multiplied by the increase from Deeper Stratagem. In tier 60, we have the best talent in the game, Cheat Death. Anything that would normally kill you will instead proc your cheat death and leave you alive. And so it's basically one get out of jail free card, or it's one lethal mechanic cheese. Elusiveness makes it so you also get 30% reduced damage from all sources. So if you have to soak high stacking debuffs or do that rogue cheese thing, elusiveness can go a long way. And Soothing Darkness gives you a little bit of a heal whenever you're in Shadow Dance, but I've never used it because Cheat Death is my boy and I don't ever want to move out of it. Tier 75 largely doesn't matter. It's more about CC in this talent. There are a couple of small options that you can take. Prey in the Weak makes it so if you CC anything, it's going to take 10% more damage. So if you can CC something, a really high priority add, it's going to die 10% faster, so that has some rage utility. Strike from the Shadows makes it so when you Shadow Strike, you stun the target, so you get a passive stun, which can be nice um, for stunning stunnable targets without wasting additional resources on it. And Tangle Shadows gives Nightblade a slow. So mostly this is a CC row. You know, pick the CC that works best for your encounter, but it's not going to give you any tangible DPS increases, except very occasionally prey on the weak. In tier 90, you have the bread and butter of our build. Dark Shadow is very straightforward. While Shadow Dance is active, all damage you deal is increased by 30%. So we now have a Shadow Dance that is going to hit 52% harder than it would base. This is where the meat of our hard-hitting Shadow Dance damage comes from. And so if you are running the build that I'm, purveying to you in this guide, this is what you're always going to take. And tier 100, we have something very interesting on our hands. Our prevalent talent that we take most often for this build is Death from Above. Death from Above exists in all three rogue specs, and it was originally designed to be the AoE option in this row. When you use Death from Above, you do an AoE burst around you to all enemies. You then leap into the air and then come down on your focus target and hit them with a 50% stronger Eviscerate. The interesting thing is, although this was designed to be the AoE talent, we aren't taking it for its AoE damage. We're taking it because at the end of the cast, you cast a 50% stronger Eviscerate, which gives us more damage to stack into our Shadow Dance. So if I'm in Shadow Dance and I'm hitting for an 8 mil Eviscerate, if I can use Death from Above and make that a 12 mil Eviscerate, that's going to go a long way towards stacking that damage. So you pretty much always take Death from Above in this build, and it's not for the AoE, it's for the stronger Eviscerate at the end, so you can squeeze another really hard-hitting ability into our burst windows because our current build is all about burst windows. In the end, right now, talents are in a little bit of a weird place for subtlety. In a lot of specs in the game, you change your talents for certain situations. I even did that as assassination. I would change my poison types. But right now, this is pretty much the cookie cutter build. Whether you like that or you don't like that, if you're playing subtlety right now and you're using this build, you pretty much lock it in into this and leave it that way no matter the fight. Doesn't matter if it's AoE, doesn't matter if it's single target. This is going to do the most damage in all situations. So keep that in mind if this is something that you want to play and you really like talent swapping. I want to quickly go over stat priorities. So your main stat focus is mastery. You want to stack as much mastery as possible. And I've already said it, but mastery makes it so your finishing moves, which is Nightblade and Eviscerate, do increased damage. It's mostly about the increased damage to Eviscerate, so you can get harder hitting Eviscerates inside of Shadow Dance. After Mastery, you might think that you want to go to Critical Strike, but that's not true. Your second most valuable stat is Versatility, which is going to give you flat increased percent damage. The reason that Crit is third and not as valuable as it is for the other two specs is because it doesn't give you any additional resources. It's just the Crit. In Assassination, if you crit, you got double combo points. If you crit with Backstab, it does not give you an additional combo point. So if you're not generating more combo points off of the crit, it is not nearly as valuable, which is why it is your third most desirable. And as it is with all the rogue specs, haste is terrible. You want to avoid it where you can. I know there are some rings in both Nighthold and Tomb of Sargeras, where the ring with the most mastery has haste. Sim yourself, but you'll probably still take that ring even though it has haste, but you do want to avoid haste where possible. Next up, I want to talk about legendaries, and specifically the legendaries you should shoot for as a subtlety rogue. As I said in the beginning, sub-rogues are incredibly legendary dependent. As with all three rogue specs, what you want to focus on getting is the Mantle of the Master Assassin. It's BIS for all three specs. It makes it so for 6 seconds after breaking stealth, which is out of your opener or out of Vanish, Shadow Dances do not count as stealth. This is just for Vanishes and just for openers. But coming out of those two things, you are going to have 100% crit chance for 6 seconds. What this means is every 2 minutes, one of our Shadow Dance burst windows is going to have 100% crit laid over top of it. So they already hit super, super hard, and every 2 minutes you can make one of them 100% crit. That particular Shadow Dance is going to hit so, so hard. It's going to absolutely spike your damage. Um, and that's why Mantle is so important for sub right now. The second legendary you want to get is the Denial of the Half Giants. Your finishing moves extend the duration of Shadow Blades by 0.3 seconds for each combo point spent. Shadow Blades is our main DPS cooldown. It makes it so your auto attacks deal bonus damage, but more importantly, it makes it so all of your combo point generating sources generate one additional combo point. And so it increases your damage and the playability of the spec. So the risks make it so that window, instead of lasting 28 seconds like normal, will instead last around 53 seconds. So you are essentially doubling your uptime on Shadow Blades with the wrists, and it is an insane DPS increase. For people that do not have those, the Insignia of Ravenholt ring is not a bad choice. It is just going to give you some passive damage, but that passive damage is decent enough to, be useful. If your fight is really, really short, the belt is a good option because subtlety rogues have such an insane opener. But after that, if you don't have any of those four, and especially these two, it's kind of all a crapshoot. I would sim your character and figure out which of the legendaries you have is best, but those are the ones you want to focus on. Next, I want to go into the rotational part of the guide, or to teach you what your buttons actually are and when I suggest you should press them to get the most damage out of your rogue. To start off, let's talk about your most basic ability, Backstab. Backstab is an ability that does damage to the target and generates one combo point. It is your main combo point builder. Backstab does an additional 20% damage when you're behind the target, so please try to position behind the target so you can get that extra damage. So the idea is you're going to backstab up to combo point cap, and then you're going to dump with Eviscerate. When you take Deeper Strategy, you have 6 combo points. You can dump your combo points at 5 or 6 combo points. And the reason is because of passive you had called Shadow Techniques. Shadow Techniques causes it so your auto attacks have a chance to generate an extra combo point. So pretty soon here, bam, right there, I didn't backstab, but I generated an extra combo point. The reason you want to spend at 5 is if you're sitting at 5 and you hit backstab at the same time that Shadow Techniques procs an extra combo point, you are going to overcap and lose that additional combo point. So it's safer to just see there, I use backstab, but I got 2 combo points because Shadow Techniques proc. So 5 or 6, don't go to 6, and then spend. In addition to dumping with Eviscerate, you also want to spend your combo points on Nightblade, which I am tracking here. Nightblade is a dot that you want to put on the target and maintain. In addition to doing its damage over time on the target, whatever you have Nightblade applied to takes 15% increased damage from you. So the idea is build up to combo point cap. Should I refresh this Nightblade? Not yet. Dump with Eviscerate. Build back up to combo point cap. Should I reapply this yet? No. Go ahead and dump with Eviscerate, and then build back up to combo points. Now I want to reapply it. Reapply Nightblade. You can reapply Nightblade at 6 combo points with 4.5 seconds left on it, or if you spent a 5 combo point Nightblade, if that has 4.8 seconds, it's safe to refresh. So please refresh your Nightblades inside of that window. Moving on from the very basics, I want to talk about some of the additional buttons you have. Your main cooldown, Shadow Blades, makes it so your auto attacks generate additional damage, and all of your combo point generating sources generate an extra combo point. So if I hit Shadow Blades, you'll see that all my backstabs are now hitting for 2 combo points instead of 1. Causes me to get up to cap super, super fast. I also have an ability called Gormal's Bite. It's my artifact ability. Gormal's Bite generates 3 combo points and gives you energy. You want to use this if you are below 3 combo points and you are below about half energy. Its damage is pretty negligible. The point of Gormal's Bite is to give you resources when you don't have any. See, right now I'm low on energy and I'm low on combo points. If I had Gormal's Bite, that would have been a really nice time to use it because I don't want to fall behind. I don't want to lose my Nightblade or lose out on an Eviscerate. So it is a quick grab for resources. You can leave it off cooldown for maybe up to 5 seconds, maybe 7 seconds. If you wait for an opportune time to use it, you don't want to have it sit off cooldown so long that you are losing entire casts of it, but its damage isn't that important. Use it when you need the resources. We also have Shadow Dance, which I have been talking about for a long time. When you enter Shadow Dance, you are doing all the increased damage I've been talking about, but additionally, your backstab ability gets turned into an ability called Shadow Strike. Eviscerate does the vast majority of your rogue's damage. After Eviscerate, your next hardest hitting ability is Shadow Strike. While Eviscerate does, 50% of your damage, Shadow Strike still does about 20 to 25. It hits very, very hard. You want to get as many Shadow Strikes into the fight as you possibly can. So I have Nightblade on the target. I want to get up to max. I'm up to max. I'm going to hit Shadow Dance, and I'm going to Shadow Strike, and then Eviscerate, and then Shadow Strike, and then Shadow Strike. So when I hit that Shadow Dance, I'm doing all that juicy increased damage that I was talking about. So to get the most damage out of the sub rogue, it's not enough to just throw out your shadow dances. What you want to do is you want to make your shadow dances count. You want to make them hit, as hard as you possibly can. So what are we going to do to make that happen? Well, first of all, we want to make sure that Nightblade is going to last the entire duration. If I were to go into Shadow Dance right now with 3 seconds left, Nightblade would fall off during Shadow Dance. I would lose the 15% bonus. So make sure that has a good duration on it, right? Then what are we going to do? We are going to Symbols of Death, Death from Above, and then we are going to cast Shadow Dance right before we land so that the Eviscerate part of the DFA is buffed by the Shadow Dance. So again, the idea is when Symbols of Death comes off cooldown, the second Symbols of Death comes off cooldown, I want to be ready to use it. I want to be ready to pop it, and here it comes. So I'm going to Symbols of Death, Death from Above, and then Shadow Dance at the end. Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike. That is the go-to combo. That is the rotation for your Shadow Dances. I'm going to try to do this a couple more times just so you get the idea, but you want to have Symbols of Death buff, Death from Above, and Shadow Dance, all of those damage increasing sources all layered together while making sure that Nightblade is not going to fall off during it. So we start off by symbols so that your DFA is buffed by the symbols. And then when you're in the air, you cannot cast anything. But when you land, you can. So while you're in the air, you want to be spamming Shadow Dance as much as possible. So the second you land, you press Shadow Dance, and the follow-up 50% bonus Eviscerate is inside of the Shadow Dance window. Ready? So we are going to Symbols, DFA, spam Shadow Dance Eviscerate, Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike. After you land, when you're in the air and after you land, once you go into Shadow Dance, you want to get off 3 Shadow Strikes and 1 Eviscerate. And the way this works is, in sub, there's a passive. Whenever you use a finishing move, you get energy refunded to you. See, I'm low energy here. I use Eviscerate, and it went down and then bounced all the way back up. So we want to use that to our advantage. When we land, we want to get Shadow Strike, which is going to take our energy down to pretty low, Eviscerate so that we get all that energy back, and then get a third Shadow Strike out of it. If you can get 3 Shadow Strikes and 1 Eviscerate and the DFA out of your Shadow Dances, that is everything you want to do. So let's get up to combo point cap. Symbols, DFA, spam Shadow Dance, Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike. And so if you sometimes at the end, you don't pull everything off fast enough and you fall out of Shadow Dance before you can get that third Shadow Strike. You want to avoid that where you can, but it does happen occasionally if you're not fast enough on the trigger, so to speak. All right, now let's try to put together everything we learned. First, I'm going to show you the opener to Subtlety. Keep in mind that my opener keeps in mind that I have the Mantle of the Master Assassin, which means I prioritize my Vanish pretty heavily because it's going to give me 6 seconds of crit. you don't have those shoulders, you might not prioritize Vanish in your opener or rotation much. It's going to give you one free Shadow Strike, but beyond that, it doesn't have a ton of value. So your Vanish usage might be differ a little bit from mine. As you watch the opener, you just want to watch mine, memorize it, and then just practice it, practice it, practice it until it's muscle memory. Openers are not reactive. Openers are a set series of steps that you just do. It's all muscle memory. You want it to be exactly the same every time. It's going to take you a lot of time to practice down to memorize your opener, but getting as much damage out of it as possible goes a long way. If I botch my opener, I definitely feel it by the end of the fight. So as I were to go up to the target, I would old war pot to start off, and I would prolonged pot later in the fight. So I would pre-pot, Shadow Blaze, and I would Shadow Strike, Backstab, Nightblade, Shadow Dance, Shadow Strike, Symbols, Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike, Backstab. Then I would Vanish, Death from Above, spam it, Shadow Strike, Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike, and then I want to try to re-put on my Nightblade, and then I would just kind of organically play it out. I'm going to throw in my Gormaz there because I was low on resources. I'm going to use my Trinket that I happen to have, and I'm just going to go through. I want to use these, boom, windows up, use the window, Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike. I didn't play that perfectly because my Nightblade fell off for a split second, but I'm going to reapply that. And I'm generating double combo points, so things are really easy right now. Just generating double combo points, waiting for my burst window. When my burst window is ready, I'm going to hit that Symbols, and then I'm going to DFA, and then on the way down, we'll be spamming Shadow Dance. So Symbols, DFA, spamming Shadow Dance on the way down, and then Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike. Now, I let my Nightblade fall off during that. That's a big problem that people can have when they first start playing the spec, is that if they don't watch Nightblade, it's going to fall off, and it's very easy to let it fall off when you're in the middle of doing your burst window, because you're concentrated fully on that burst window. So burst window is up. I'm going to Symbols, Death from Above, Shadow Dance on the way down, Shadow Dance the Eviscerate, and then Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, and Shadow Strike. If you do not get your 50% stronger Eviscerate inside of the Shadow Dance, that is a huge loss, guys. Don't wait till you land and then Shadow Dance. You want to Shadow Dance upon the landing. So here I'm not going to make it up to combo points if I don't use Gormaz Bite. So I use Gormaz Bite there. And then I'm going to Vanish, Symbols, DFA, Shadow Dance, and then Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike. And then my cooldown is up. I'm going to pop that, reapply Nightblade, and keep going as I was. The idea is that you want to eviscerate at 5 combo points or above inside your burst window. So you usually want to go into your burst window with at least 1 combo point because Shadow Strike only generates 2. So do that where you can. So go into another window. And that's pretty much how it goes. You just want to maintain your dot, eviscerate as much as you can, and then be setting up for your burst windows. In addition to managing the resources from your combo points and energy, you also don't want your Shadow Strikes to ever sit on 2 charges, Shadow Dances to ever sit on 2 charges. So you will occasionally not just want to use 1 Shadow Dance per window. There are times when you'll want to use the second Shadow Dance. What I suggest is one of the following things. You go into your burst window, you do the burst window like you normally would, and then you follow it up immediately with another burst window. So you can piggyback off of some of the remaining time of the Symbols of Death you just used. Other than that, I would save your second Shadow Strike for moments of AoE. And I'll go over the AoE rotation next. But if you use Shadow Strike on your AoE, it's going to have a lot of damage to it. So if the target is pure, or if the fight is pure single target, I would just use 2 Shadow Dances together when you have them, without letting them cap, or I would use the other one on AoE. Next, I want to talk about the AoE. Subtlety has one of the most unique ways of doing AoE in the game. They have an absolutely ton of damage when there are multiple adds out. The odd thing is when you add more mobs to a fight for Subtlety, their damage goes up significantly, but they don't do damage to all the mobs evenly. usually when you add more mobs to a fight, what happens is your ability just hits all of them, and that's what makes your damage go up. Subtlety has a very unique way of doing AoE, and it makes us absolute monsters in Mythic Plus because of an ability called Shuriken Combo. Shuriken Storm increases the damage of your next eviscerate by 10% for each enemy hit beyond the first, stacks up to 5 times. Well, what is Shuriken Combo? Shuriken Combo is essentially our AoE combo point builder. You use it the same way you do Backstab. You just use it to generate combo points, but you use it instead of backstab when there are multiple enemies. You use it if there are 2 or more enemies outside of Shadow Dance or 3 or more enemies inside of Shadow Dance. So normally where we would build up with backstab, instead we're going to use Shuriken Storm. See this little fan of knives style of thing? It's going to hit everything and it's going to generate 1 combo point per everything hit. So it's really easy to maintain because I can just basically Shuriken Storm, just immediately eviscerate. Then I can just Shuriken Storm and eviscerate. And how the AoE works is you basically pick one target and you apply your Nightblade to it. You might think, oh, I should apply Nightblade to all of these targets and then get the dot rolling on all of them. You should do that for maybe 2 target, apply Nightblade to both targets, but because Nightblade is such a short duration and does such a small amount of actual dot damage, it's pretty inefficient to apply Nightblade to everything. So you essentially want to pick one target, apply Nightblade to it, and the AoE is super easy. You just eviscerate, or you just Shuriken Storm, eviscerate, Shuriken Storm, eviscerate, all into the target that you have Nightbladed. And what's happening is, for every enemy I hit, see this buff up here? It is doing more damage. So I'm hitting 4 enemies. So up here, my Shuriken combo is making it so my next eviscerate deals 40% increased damage. So what I'm doing is I'm hitting everything and then funneling all of my AoE damage into one target. So it's, Shuriken combo, Nightblade, Shuriken combo, eviscerate, Shuriken combo, eviscerate, Shuriken combo, eviscerate, and I'm taking all these mobs and forcing all the damage into just one of the mobs. It's a ton of fun. If you really want that edge for your AoE damage, you need the burst. What you can do is you can Shadow Dance and then do the Shuriken Storm. So before you would Shadow Dance at the end of your DFA, now you can use your Shadow Dance to buff your Shuriken Combo. Shuriken Combo does 100% increased damage if it's inside of Shadow Dance. So it's the same idea, but if you really want it to be punchy, you can Shadow Dance and then just keep it going. So now your Shuriken Storm is doing a lot of damage. Where normally your Shuriken Storm damage isn't that big of a deal. It's all about the buffed up Eviscerate. But if you Shadow Dance, now your Shuriken Storm is actually hitting pretty hard. It does a pretty good amount of damage. And if you're really, really looking to maximize your AoE, don't forget that Death from Above does do an AoE component at the beginning. The AoE component doesn't really matter on single target, but you can utilize the fact that it does AoE if there are enough targets. If there are 5 or 6 targets, instead of DFA and then doing your combo at the end, what you can do is you can buff all your AoE and then do DFA at the end. So what I would do is I come in here, Nightblade the target, then I might Shadow Dance, Shuriken Storm, and then, do maybe 1 or 2 Shuriken Storm combos. And then at the end, so I'll be Shadow Dance, Shuriken Storm, and then I had Symbols and then DFA. So it's not the end part of the DFA that gets buffed up, but you're buffing up the first part of the DFA. So you Symbols and Shadow Dance before you use DFA, so that the AoE component is what gets buffed up. Most of the damage increasing components of your artifact weapon are passive, but there's one I want to bring special attention to, and that's called Finality. After using a Nightblade or Eviscerate, your next use of that finishing move is empowered. So you'll get a buff occasionally called Finality Eviscerate or Finality Nightblade. Let's focus on the Finality Eviscerate. And it makes it so your next Eviscerate does 24% increased damage. So you use an Eviscerate, and then you get that buff, and then your next Eviscerate consumes the buff and does a ton of extra damage. So there's a lot of guides and a lot of people out there that say, don't go into your burst window unless you have Finality up. But that's incredibly, incredibly difficult. You are already trying to work around your Nightblade cooldown and cooldown of Symbols of Death and your cooldown of DFA and maintain everything that trying to wait until you get a Finality buff ends up just delaying your burst window. Maybe you have everything set up perfectly, everything comes off cooldown, you're ready to hit the burst window, but you don't have a finality buff. So you say, oh, well, I should get back up to combo points, eviscerate, get back up to combo points, and then do it so that my DFA is buffed by finality. But you've lost so much time. You've lost basically a full cycle by doing that. And so finality is really something you should view as icing on the cake. Every once in a while, you are going to do extra damage from it, but don't play around it. If you try to force it, you're just going to end up delaying your other abilities by significant margins. If you can work it in without delaying anything else, great, go for it. But I don't necessarily track it or necessarily kill myself trying to make sure I get every ounce of finality out because it's too much to manage on top of you're already managing, and the things you're already managing are more important than managing it. Before I close out the video, guys, I want you to understand that the information on Sub Rogue is developing on the time as we get further in the tier and as we get more gear. And so some of the small intricacies about the spec are going to change over time and have already started to shift. I want to bring up a few of those things that are starting to shift in the Rogue meta now so you can understand why my information earlier in the video might differ. So I mentioned that you should lead the fights with an old war pot. A lot of the rogues are starting to shift to using 2 prolonged powers, so you can keep that in mind. In your opener, I use my Symbols of Death. 1 Shadow Strike after I use my first Shadow Dance. If you have 4-piece, a lot of rogues are starting to use their Symbols of Death upon their first Shadow Dance cast in the opener. And additionally, there is a bug right now with Vanish where you can get an extra Shadow Strike in instead of vanishing and going directly into DFA. I'm not going to go over all the details of that in this video. You can check out the Rogue Discord for more on the Vanish bug. I didn't bring it up in this guide because I wanted it to be more generalized, but it is there available for you. And lastly, just tonight, right before I plan to release this guide onto YouTube, we've gotten word of a few nerfs that are happening to the shoulders and the wrist legendaries, the two best in slot legendaries for sub. This could lead to playstyle changes, Lego changes, and meta shifts for the sub rogue. If these nerfs turn out to have big impact on the spec, I'm going to release a new video detailing all those changes. If it doesn't impact the gameplay much, I probably will leave well enough alone with just this guide. Unfortunately, guys, I can't go over every single possible scenario or little nitty gritty thing in a video like this. Verbally trying to explain some of those super fine, minute details kind of gets lost in translation in a video guide like this. So if you have any questions, please leave them below in the comments, and I'll do my best to get back to you within a couple of the days and try to get your questions resolved. But for me, that's going to do it. I hope you learned something. I hope this guide helped. If it did help, go ahead and hit the like button, maybe subscribe, and have a fantastic day. Until next time, I'll see you later.